I overpack.
That's funny. Okay, so first question is, when did your career begin?
I began teaching in January of 1980.
What school did you teach at?
Plaza Elementary School in Plaza, North Dakota.
Where else did you teach?
I taught in Tioga, North Dakota, and Casper, Wyoming at Grant Elementary School. I did 3.5 years of subbing for Natrona County School District before I was hired full-time at Grant.
What grades did you teach?
My first job in Plaza was 5th and 6th grade combination classroom with 15 students. Then I taught 6 years in Tioga, North Dakota, 5th grade. Then I subbed all grade levels, kindergarten through middle school, with a lot of PE and art. And then I taught 3 years, 1st grade at Grant, and this is my 21st year teaching kindergarten at Grant.
21st year?
Yeah.
Wow. So you liked kinder best?
You know, it depends on what grade level I was teaching. I liked all the grade levels when I was teaching them, but I wouldn't want to move back to 5th and 6th grade now in here with the students we have and the issues that they have in those ages now. It was a small town, and we didn't have the same thing going on. But they were so much more independent and fun and understood my sarcastic sense of humor better than 5-year-olds do.
That's fun. So how would you describe the communities where you taught?
The first one was a very small farming community where the grade levels were a combination and the teachers had been living there forever and raised their families there. Was not a lot of change, at least in the elementary level. The second one was a farming and kind of oil field community. Again, a lot of the people at the time I taught there had been there for generations. That's where I met my husband. Playing volleyball.
And that's where you taught for 6 years?
That's where I taught for 6 years in Tioga.
Okay.
And then, I don't know how to describe Casper. It's just it's the largest place I've ever lived. When I started, we had 20 to 24 elementary schools when I was subbing. And very different economic situations in the different parts of the communities. They were all, how would I say, they were all neighborhood schools when I started. And then when it switched to schools of choice, you saw a lot more consistent classes throughout the year, because when it was a neighborhood school, if you moved during the year, say when the parents couldn't pay the bills and everything got shut up, they got kicked out of a place, had to move to a different part of town, kids had to go. You couldn't stay. If you moved from one part of the town to another neighborhood, you had to switch schools. Middle of the week, middle of the month.
Crazy.
Yeah.
When?
And now, what would you say? Now it's really a lot of oil field.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with the petroleum industry.
When did it switch to school of choice?
Oh my gosh. It's been at least probably 15 years about. Because my daughter, Emily, was starting kindergarten and it was school of choice and I had to choose. I mean, although we live only a block away, I could have tried to get her into this school or any school. And so it was hard. And then finally we were like, we bought this home because it's in a triangle of all those grade levels. I mean, we had elementary a block away, not that far away was Centennial and then Kelly Walsh. So we decided that we would send our kids to those schools because we had nothing against going to Verta James. I did look though at ones that were using the same programs that we were.
Because you taught here.
Because I taught here. When she started, I was already here.
So Verta James used the same programs that
Well,
Grant did?
like math.
Okay.
Or no, they didn't. But University Park had some of the same programs we did. So I looked at Verta James and then some of the other ones that had similar. I just knew I didn't want her to. I was the only kindergarten teacher at the time, and I didn't want her. And then that's when we switched to all-day kindergarten, and she was able to get into a lottery. They registered them in the spring, and then they decided to do one all-day and the other half-day, and they had a lottery and drew names for who.
That's
They
weird.
had to send out a questionnaire, would you want your child in all-day kindergarten? I was like, yeah, and I was there sitting waiting in line to register my kid to make sure she got on the list and got in, because then it was first come, first.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's wild.
and then afterwards, and then it was the lottery, and I was like, should have been whoever registered would go with those people first.
Yeah.
But she got in.
That's good.
Yeah.
So at the time, were you teaching full day?
I was teaching. We were just switching. No, we had full day, and then by fall we added a second one.
Oh,
So she could have had Kim Hildebrand probably.
okay.
But yeah.
Okay. Do you have a favorite memory of your teaching experience?
Right now, one of my favorite memories is seeing the kids when they finally, for the first year ever since we hatched chicks, got to watch their faces and see their excitement when the chicks were hatched. I mean, there's lots of different memories, but right now that's just really fresh in my mind, so. It was amazing. They were so excited. It was the best day of Marley's life ever. So far.
Have you noticed changes taking place in the public schools during or since your career?
Yeah. I talked a lot about here in Casper, the school of choice has been a big thing. Well, I don't know if this is the right question to say this on. You can move it to another question if you have to. That when I first started teaching, we didn't have the Common Core to do that. You had your textbooks, and you followed your textbooks. You didn't have anything else to guide you. You went from page 1 and worked your way as far through as you could get through the textbook in a year. Which was interesting when you were teaching a combination 5th and 6th grade, because there you taught, because it was a small community, the kids were there always, the same kids, very seldom change. I would teach 5th grade science, 6th grade social studies. And the next year, they switched it and would do like the 5th grade social studies and 6th grade science. Because the kids were in there and they were going to get both.
Huh.
It was just because you had to teach 5th grade math and reading, and you had to teach 6th grade math and reading, but you don't have time in your schedule to teach both of them. But you had to get through those textbooks with those kids.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And the same thing when I was teaching in North Dakota, it was back in the 80s, and I was asked to be part of that by when they were forming the curriculum committee for mathematics for North Dakota. My college professor recommended me, and I was asked to be on, and I was on that committee to develop the curriculum for the state. for math.
Wow.
And for the whole state, it was like the committee that we have here, or probably even smaller than the ones we have just for our district now.
And you were developing it for the entire
And we were
state.
doing it for the entire state.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's long since discarded, I'm sure, but yeah, in the 80s, early 80s, we did that in for the whole state. What else? I don't know if it's true just because of the size of the schools, but it's changed a lot in parent involvement. When I was first teaching, parent involvement meant the PTO, it meant room mothers, and now parent involvement involves getting the parents into the classrooms a lot more, I think, and having them volunteer to work with kids or to do things that way, on top of some schools that have the PTO or PTA. But yeah, it was that way. And parent-teacher conferences, when I was first teaching, even teaching in Natona County, they didn't have student-led conferences. Student-led conferences to me seem like they're a newer thing, because it was just your traditional teacher sat on their side of the desk and the parents sat on the other side. What else? Like I said, there was no Common Core that guided everybody, so it's different.
So you didn't even have standards before
Well,
that?
I don't remember here are your state standards.
Yeah.
I don't remember. They probably were, but that's 35 years ago.
Right. Because I remember before Common Core there was like the Wyoming state standards, but I don't know if they were as precedent as.
Yeah, there probably
Common
were,
Core.
but like I say, we were developing curriculum.
Right. That's awesome.
Developing the stuff. What else? What else has changed? It's gone through phases where you followed the textbooks, and then it was switching over to teachers having a lot more control of the materials they use, to the point where I think here at Grant it was I don't even know what I want. Everybody was going their own direction, and we just felt like there was no cohesiveness. There was not a spiraling curriculum, or each grade didn't know what the other grade was doing, and there were a lot of holes. And we would, it was decided, okay, everybody is going to teach the Saxon math program with fidelity. Then we were going to develop, and we went through all the stuff about choosing a reading program. And then all of a sudden came up the opportunity to do reading first. And so we became a reading first, and everybody was trained in that. And there was a lot of people that were kind of, I think, balked at that because they wanted to continue doing their own thing. And I can't even think of the term for it right now. Not literacy first. I can't think of what it was called now. But it was there. Everybody would just kind of do their own reading program. They pull their own materials, and I can't think of what it's called now. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Let's see. And then, and then when you get a new principal, then it switched again. We went from reading first, literacy first, we're using now to guide us, and the state standards. And I think that's a good thing, because those for years it was kind of free, and you can do your own thing as long as you teach them this, and nobody knew what anybody else was doing, and if they were doing what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
So I like the more accountability piece right now. It's better.
Okay. If you think of more, we can go back
Okay.
to that question. Did you receive any special training to become a teacher?
Well, I went to the University of North Dakota, got my Bachelor of Science degree in elementary education and mathematics. But I don't have any special endorsement in any specific area. In North Dakota, I believe I was able to teach kindergarten through 8th grade. That's since changed so that here I would have to have a middle school endorsement. But there was not middle schools then. Really considered. Where I taught, you have your elementary and you have your high school. That's where I grew up. That's where.
Because it was so small, or that's just how the schools
That's just
were?
how the schools were at that time,
Crazy.
and probably because they were smaller communities. Then later I had to when I had to get make sure that I was highly qualified, but that didn't happen until I'd been teaching here for a long time. But they came at you had to have that.
And
But,
did you have to take a test to become highly qualified?
No, did not have to take a test to be highly qualified. They checked to see if you had the right classes. So, like, I think we turned in our transcripts from the colleges we had been to, the graduate classes we had taken. And boy, you know, that certificate is hanging on my wall behind my other ones to make sure, or my letter, so that nobody can ever come back and say, you're not highly qualified.
That's funny.
It's going to be there. When I did get certified to do from North Dakota to Wyoming, I had to take, I can't remember if it was, I think it was when I started subbing, or at least when I got my certificate, was you had to take Wyoming Constitution test.
Oh.
Had to take a test on the Wyoming Constitution. Never had to do anything like a praxis. Didn't have to have a portfolio to turn in. Anything like that.
Now, if you want to become highly qualified, you have to take a test. That's what I had to do last year
No.
to become highly qualified in early childhood. Huh. Interesting.
When my sisters became teachers, a few years before me, all 4 of them have lifetime certificates. They would have to take graduate classes to move on their pay scales, but never to renew a certificate. They never had to renew them.
And now it's only 5 years.
Yeah, now it's only 5 years. They have lifetime ones.
That's crazy.
I don't know if there's a part on their question. I did get my master's degree.
Through
Grand Canyon University. It was in 2004.
how long did that take you to get that?
About a year and a half. I did it with a study group. Began with doing it with videos, and then halfway through our program they turned it to online. But we had a group of 6. If I had to do it over again, if I was going to do it, I would do it early on in my career, because I had Bachelor of Science plus 45 hours, my degree, and then when you get your master's, those kind of 45 just kind of disappear. It doesn't count as your master's plus 45.
So you had to go
It
all
has
the
to
way
be-
back?
Well, you don't drop on the pay scale really, but it's not master's plus 45. It's your master's.
Just master's.
I had moved to 45 hours on the pay scale, but then once you get your master's, it's not master's plus those 45. The Ford Plus part comes after the master's.
Oh. Oh, that
So you can't
stinks.
move, you know. You can't have your 45 and your master's unless you take them after. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. What did you get your master's in?
Elementary education. It's
So
not.
it wasn't just like it wasn't like an area.
It's not reading. It's just the It's just the Master's of Arts in Teaching.
Okay.
It's not a reading endorsement or math or anything like that.
It's interesting. I feel like now you have to
Yes.
pick like an area
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. We answered that question. How would you describe the process you went through to get hired?
My first ones went in, interviewed before we left. It was just the principal. The first two jobs were just the superintendent, actually, and because they were very small districts, so the superintendent of the school interviewed me, and before we walked out of the office, they asked if I want. Each one of them had asked if I wanted to go see my classroom, and that was how I found out I had the job. So before we left their office and went over to the buildings where the classrooms would be to see my room. Then for Casper, when I was first interviewing, you would go and interview with the individual principals for the positions, and I dropped my resume off at each of those. I had them on file up there, but I would bring my resume and go into each building and talk to the principals and stuff. And then when I interviewed, tape recorder on the desk, and they would ask questions. Just the principal and me. And they were principals that I had subbed for a lot. So I kind of knew them that way. I think that's how I got my foot in the door, is by subbing. And then each step along the way of getting it approved, being submitted, Tom Messiker would call and let me know, well,
Good morning, Gregory, please.
I want to
Members
offer
of
you
the
this
City
position.
Council, please come to the
I'm
library.
turning it
Thank
in.
you.
Turning it into the district, to the board, and then he would let me know, how long it would be before they were going to meet and approve, and then he called and offered me the job. But there was no interview committees for any position I hired. It was either directly with the superintendents or the principals. I've never had to be interviewed by a team.
You lucky.
Even the year that I went to half, one group of kindergarten, and I had to find another half-day position around the district. I had to go out and apply for half-day positions and interview, and it was just with the principals.
Really? How long ago was that?
Molly was a baby, so 17 years ago.
That's crazy. So when you were looking for jobs, how did you find out? Like, how did you figure out that they were hiring?
I went online, I'm pretty sure, and looked up, but I can't even remember that for sure. I know I went to the different buildings and talked to, the office, and turned in my resumes, stuff like that. But I don't remember about that one. The ones in North Dakota, you looked in the want ads in the newspaper, and actually got connections for my very first job through a principal of the superintendent of where I grew up. They were family friends, and he knew somebody needed to fill in a position for the second semester, and he called up and recommended me for the position.
Oh, that's cool.
So
that's when you taught that half year?
that half year in
Okay.
Plaza,
Okay.
and lived in a little house with another teacher who I met the day I got hired. And it was owned by the school.
The house was?
They teacher housing.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, don't feel like you hear about that ever here.
Uh,
Teacher housing.
Yeah.
Do you remember if there was paperwork involved when you got hired?
Not a lot of paperwork. No. I know I probably had to have a copy of my teaching certificate and have it sent to them and sign a contract. But I've always had a contract with an extra part of a year on it that isn't normal for most people because my second position, the gentleman that was a superintendent there that hired me, put that in my contract for that first semester, and was the only one in that school that I taught at for 6 years that had that half a year salary attached to their contract.
So with that in your contract, that affected your salary?
It affected my salary. Yeah. It gave me this odd part on the pay scale.
Well, that was cool of him to do
Yeah.
that. Last night when you were talking about it, I was not sure. So you've already described interview process. Your contract. What was your contract like when you got hired?
I don't know. It was maybe like probably look about the same as now, but there was not a teacher, the compact or anything like big like that.
Was it for like a certain amount of time, your contract?
They'll begin with they were like, from year to year.
Okay.
I don't remember if it was like, it's like 3 years and then you knew you had a continuing contract, similar to the way it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you didn't really worry about whether you'd have a position because it was a small town and they had so many, they were not going to be able to cut classrooms because there weren't that many of them. It's not like where we have all these schools with all these classrooms around here, and if we lose 20 kids and they have to cut a position or something, then your building or whatever it is, you didn't worry about that. There was, in my building, there was kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and one of each. And across town there was another school that had one of each. And it just kind of stayed steady, small town like that.
Well, yeah, and if you got rid of one, then you'd be out of grade, so.
Yeah. So you really was like, you didn't worry about being cut because of the number of students or anything like that.
Yeah. The question says, what duties did your position require?
You had lunch duty, you had playground duties, and it rotated as to, you wouldn't have to do it every recess or everything like that, but it rotated and on which days you had a morning recess or lunch recess or afternoon. So you had your pack snow boots and your ski pants and jacket or a snowmobile suit or whatever because you were going to be out there and it was cold in North Dakota.
Was it like that in Casper too?
No, in Casper, never really had those additional duties. Always had someone, assistants who did the playground in Casper.
ID badge on you while we were at NC so that parents and others are able to identify who they can contact if they need assistance. So please make sure you have your ID either on a lanyard or somewhere hooked onto your personal clothing items. Thank you.
Okay.
How would you describe your teaching methods?
My teaching methods. Oh my gosh. Is this recording my voice?
Yeah.
Do this. It's going to be awful.
No, it's okay.
You can edit it?
Yeah.
Okay, please do. Can we come back to that?
Yep. How would you describe the paperwork associated with your job?
The paperwork, okay. Well, well, the documentation now has increased where you documenting your interventions for all your students so that you're going through the different tiers of intervention and that you have done it for the amount of time. But that there are people that help you with that. I mean, if you're documenting if it's behavior interventions, you've got someone who's recording that as long as you're filling it out and turning it in when you send students in for behavior. Documenting that you've contacted the parents about behavior concerns or academic concerns. We've always done that, but it seems like you just want to make sure you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's and, you know,
Yeah.
making sure that you're using the right tier or level of interventions for the right amount of time before you move on to another one, and that you've documented that it hasn't been effective. What else? We having, instead of just report cards 4 times a year in Casper or Natrona County School Districts, we've always done progress reports. So it's almost like you're giving a report card, I feel, the way I do it in kindergarten, 8 times a year.
And you didn't have to do that in North Dakota?
I don't, no progress reports. There are state reports. We keep the data notebooks on kids now that we didn't used to do. Kids have their own notebook full of their progress and there's paperwork in there. It's filling in and recording, like when we test our students on Lit First, assessments, making sure that you have those reports up to date. The district requires them certain times throughout the year, but that our building has decided that we want monthly times that those are turned in, so we are aware that that paperwork is up to date.
So it's the paperwork has increased.
Oh, the paperwork has increased, yes. That would have been the simple answer, right?
No. You went into depth. There's nothing wrong with that. How did you select the materials that you chose to teach?
Well,
We've
when
kind
I
of already talked about this.
when I was first, it was you were given these are your textbooks. Here it is. You have no choice. Then it was when we were first teaching. When I was first teaching here 20 some years ago, 24, teaching first grade. Yeah, there were the materials, but then you could supplement things in them, and then it gradually got. After a while, it got away from the whole district having the same textbooks to different buildings were able to choose as long as it met the certain criteria and was research based. And that happened in almost all areas, in math and in reading especially, or language arts. They went through phases where people were able to get away more from it and were picking their own materials, not just to supplement, but to completely replace. And now we're using the Common Core and choosing research-based materials and resources that support meeting those standards. And a lot of the, for reinforcing some of the Lit First skills, we've received a lot of resources from our principal this past year especially. Wow. And then it's even come to the point where we can find if it's going to help to meet the strategies, help students meet the standards in specific areas, we're able to go online and find lots of resources now that I don't think were available before. In the last few years, it's amazingly easy to find some really kid-friendly stuff. How much more is there?
There's still like 13 questions. Do you want to stop it here? Yeah, and we can finish
We
later.
need to get the stuff up to third grade.
Yeah.